Check, check. Check, check, check. All right. All right. Hey, boy, we're starting up right now. Yo, what's up?
What's up, bro? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. How about you?
Yeah. I told you about that bail fund that we raised here in
Yeah,
Jacksonville.
it was a crazy amount of money, wasn't it?
Yeah, bro. That's just crazy.
How much is it now?
Well, we had raised like 105,000.
Yeah.
We had like small businesses like reaching out, like white ones too.
What about John Phillips?
That guy's hilarious.
What?
That guy's hilarious.
In what way?
Are you recording now?
Well, I mean, it's technically on. Let me pause it. Yeah.
Don't get this on the cut.
I was about to go to.
Yeah. How you been, Max?
Hanging in there. Yeah.
Busy guy.
You seem like you're busy too.
Yeah. Been busy myself.
Is the revolution gonna happen anytime soon?
We'll see after the next depression.
Yeah.
I think in the next 5 years, I think we're in a revolutionary moment.
I mean, compared to like what you see in DC, Max, and like what they got in Jacksonville really is pretty impressive in terms of like I mean, from a reactionary town like that, the alliances they built with the community, it's just what like PSL should be doing with like their situation in DC. Like they're getting, demanding like not just defund the police shit, but just like concrete shit that it could be achievable, and then like by,
I think they're doing more in Philly.
Yeah, taking the message to the masses. But anyways,
let me ask some technical question. Is that your shot, Nathaniel?
Yeah. Should I change it?
Yeah, you can't be having your computer on the screen. So can you lift your camera up higher? Or
I can just do that. Yeah. I can also just better yet, I'll just move my desk down because I have a.
Okay, perfect. Excellent.
Look at that.
Okay, stop it. Okay, now can you move your mic closer to your mouth?
Yeah.
The closer it is, the better the sound's going to be. All right. That's your shot, Mike?
Yeah.
You can't bring your computer up a little bit? Like put on some books or something? It would give you more perspective, I think. Are there any books you can put it on? If not, whatever. Is there like space behind the books on the desk? There you go. That looks way better. Yeah, tilt it down a little bit more. All right, perfect. No. Yeah, we're up. Yeah, right there. Perfect. All right, good. That's so much better. All right.
All right, how's that with me? Like over.
Yeah, the sound's better too.
All right, I don't care if I'm not centered. Really, I can.
No, you're in good shape.
Although that crap on the right, I do kind of don't want that in
Well,
there.
just tilt the thing towards you. No. All right, that's fine.
Yeah. It's all right.
Okay, that works. Yeah, that's perfect. Take the scarlet out though.
Oh, that wasn't even in there until this.
All right. It's good enough. I mean, you have a good background, so.
All right. So I'm gonna hit play real quick, and then what it already is, and then I'm gonna start off this. We'll clap, and then you get going. All right. I'm gonna just say after I clap, I'm gonna say something like, "Now I want to bring in," because like it's gonna be after I do the monologue when this thing comes out. So all right, here we go. So all right, 3, 2, 1. Let me double check my image. All right, good. All right, 3, 2, 1. Now I want to bring in my co-host of Redspin Sports, Michael Sampson, community organizer with the Jacksonville, Florida Community Action Committee, where he works with a coalition of activists on organizing mass support for their demand that the city create a Jacksonville Police Accountability Council to replace the killer cop exoneration machine known as internal affairs. My other guest is Max Blumenthal, co-host of the Moderate Rebels podcast, editor of the Grayzone, and the best-selling author of 4 books, including Management of Savagery, How America's National Security State Fueled the Rise of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Donald Trump, and particularly relevant for today's conversation, Goliath, Life and Loathing in Greater Israel. We're all here to analyze the underlying issues needed to provide context to the aftermath of this Deshaun Jackson story and the abysmal treatment in mainstream media it's received. Its cynical exploitation by Israel lobby operatives, and perhaps most importantly, the unholy alliance between the NFL and apartheid Israel. So Mike and Max, glad to have both of you here. We're going to start out by viewing a handful of clips to help contextualize the issues we're about to dive into for the audience. We'll begin by checking out and reacting to Patriots wide receiver and Israeli baseball cheerleader.
Hey, Nate, sorry to cut in, but just a production point. Is there any way you could just say that naturally in your own voice and then be like, let's watch, like, and then say, like, I've been watching these clips. They're like crazy. Like, I want to, like, all
right. I've been watching the, all right.
Yeah. Just try to make it more
Get
natural.
rid of contextualizing. All right.
And I mean, if you don't have like your, what's it called? A teleprompter, then like, you know, right behind the camera, it just doesn't look right, you know, if you're reading off a computer. So I don't know if you can introduce us kind of, I mean, the introduction's fine, but if you want to bring in the clips, just kind of like in a, like,
yeah. I got you. All right.
So like, I've been watching these, are fucking ridiculous and insane, and just be yourself, you know?
It's all right. All right. I got it. Yeah. All right. I got you. All right, here we go. All right. I'm going to restart. Now I want to bring in my co-host of Redspin Sports, Michael Sampson, a community organizer with the Jacksonville, Florida community at the Sorry. All right. I'm going to stop reading that there. All right, I'm just going to go from the...
Michael.
Yeah.
Do it live. Introduce him. You can introduce
Do it live! Fuck!
Yeah, all right, exactly.
All right, here we go. I'm going to take that off the screen and even... All right.
Just be yourself.
All right. Now I want to bring in my co-host of Redspin Sports, Michael Sampson, with the Jacksonville Community Action Committee, where they've been working to develop a police accountability council that can bring real teeth to actually convicting and bringing charges and convicting killer cops, such as what you saw in Minneapolis and all over the country. Be something such as Civilian Police Accountability Review Board that could have real teeth. So he's been actively working on that, and we're excited to have Mike back today. Also, we have Max Blumenthal with us today, co-host of Moderate Rebels podcast, editor of the Grayzone, a best-selling author of multiple books, The Management of Savagery, and especially pertinent to today's discussion, Goliath, Life and Loathing in Greater Israel. We're going to be looking at basically the NFL and apartheid Israel and their unholy alliance, and really the abysmal treatment that mainstream media has given to this, not so much the Deshaun Jackson story, that was, there's no way to put it, you know, the words were anti-Semitic, but the issue we're really looking at here is the aftermath of it and how it's been spun, and how this sort of network of Israel lobbyists have sort of come in here and tried to develop a way to get into, you know, and really define the way that he needs to become reformed and learn from this and what that kind of thing means. So as we know, the anti-Semitism is constantly exploited by Israel lobby to try to promote their interests and not to really look at issues of real anti-Semitism, and as evidenced by people like Viktor Orban in Hungary and what goes on in Poland and whatnot. So really, we're here to analyze the larger issues and try to bring context to them in a way that'll help make sense. So Mike and Max, glad to have both of you here.
We're going to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you. Mike, how's it going in Jacksonville?
It's been busy, man. Just happy to be here. Happy to be back on.
All right.
You know, things have been, you know, politics and sports the past couple of weeks. You know, they've been explosive like we haven't seen in a long time.
No doubt, no doubt. So we're going to get into a little clip here. A lot of people have seen it on the internet. Julian Edelman from the New England Patriots, wide receiver, made an Instagram video appealing to Deshaun Jackson after his, you know, what they were anti-Semitic remarks. But nonetheless, his response, this is a guy who's gone to Israel multiple times, whitewashes apartheid, wears his Israeli baseball cap in the locker room, does all these action adventure stuff over there, and really is a very useful propaganda tool in a situation where, you know, Zionists and Zionism is losing sort of an international PR battle now. So they've really seized this opportunity, And this is not a surprise at all to people who follow the Grayzone and follow people that, cover media critically. We've seen a terrible kind of contextualizing of what this all means and what it should mean. So, Max, I want to kick it over to you now. Kind of what were your, before we get into the video real quick, just in general, like anything you want to say to start this off? Or?
Well, I think one of the most important things when you're watching these videos, actually, you showed them to me. I knew Bob Kraft, the owner of the Patriots, was bringing players over on these trips, and I'd seen, photos of Tom Brady with soldiers, but I didn't know how truly insane and mind-altering some of this footage was, and some of these experiences these players were having was.
Right.
I think it's really important to understand that the Israel lobby in the United States sees Black Americans and Latinos as a threat. They see them as the least supportive of Israel, the most likely to see their own experience and the experiences of Palestinians. And they're seeking ways of lobbying them through, for example, Christian Zionist, implanting Christian Zionist narratives into Black churches. You've seen the Israeli former ambassador to the U.S., Ron Dermer. I think he might still be ambassador, going to, Baptist churches in Atlanta where Martin Luther King used to preach at, to pay tribute to King. We've seen, Latino leaders from the National Council of La Raza and other kind of corporate NGO type organizations be given free trips to Israel. Then they come back, and the American Jewish Committee has them sign, message like letters of solidarity, pledging to work together to counter anti-Semitism and to fight for immigrants. And countering anti-Semitism in this world means standing up for Israel. And it's the same, at AIPAC. I did a video on AIPAC several years ago, and while I was documenting what was going on outside the DC Convention Center where AIPAC was being held, the biggest gathering of the Israel lobby annually, I was meeting all of these student presidents from historically Black colleges and universities who had been flown out there without knowing really much about Israel and just offered a free trip to Washington and the ability to network with people. And I was asking them about Palestinians and the whole crisis, and they were sort of, it was like talking to deer in the headlights. It was really sad. And they'd been flown out through the Saban Fellows program. Haim Saban, this pro-Israel billionaire who funded Obama and Hillary. He's a Democrat. He was paying their way. So this is part of this. I mean, what you're going to see in these videos with these players is, part of lobbying professional athletes who are predominantly Black and giving them kind of biblical narratives and completely ignoring and disappearing Palestinians from the picture.
Right. Appreciate it, Max. Mike, I want to pitch it over to you real quick before we get into the Edelman video, because I think you've had experiences that, you probably have a lot to react to in terms of what Max just said. So why don't you just pick it up there?
No, it kind of goes on the Malcolm X had a criticism of the Israel lobby back in when you had the original formations of the African Union. It was, I believe it was called neo-dollarism. He phrased it how the Israel lobby at that time with emerging African nations was using that as an opportunity to extend aid, to give a lot of, the hand of friendship in the event that, these would be the particular partners for the Israel lobby in the future to move forward and push forth their plans to expand as part of the greater Israel plan, of course, which includes, continuing to colonize nations around the state of Israel. So this is part of a greater strategy that has been in existence with the Israel lobby for decades. And as Max brought up, these HBCU presidents, the Israel lobby has identified that these historically Black university student government leaders will potentially become the next, Black House of Representative reps, so the Black senators or Black politicians who have a huge influence in the Black community. So the better way to get the Black people aligned with the agenda of the Israel lobby is to buy off their leadership, or is to get their leadership around the same kind of line of argumentation and flying them out to AIPAC conferences on the dime, and just so they hear the Israeli lobby perspective before they actually hear about the plight of the Palestinian people. one big example of that is Bakari Sellers. He was actually an SGA president at Morehouse University when he was approached by AIPAC and those representatives. And now, what do you see now? He's one of the biggest cheerleaders on CNN for the Israeli lobby and their continued oppression of the Palestinian people. So this has been a strategy that's been utilized by the Israeli lobby for decades. They know the power of the black voice here in the United States of America, and the better way to kind of neutralize that threat and to kind of neutralize oppressed people like black people and Palestinian people all coming together to kind of push back against U.S. imperialism and its proxies in Israel is to get that support from the black politicians and kind of, in a very weird way, sort of make sure that these black politicians like a John Lewis or other black elected officials support the agenda of the Israeli lobby and don't show that solidarity with the Palestinian people. Like, right. If black people and Palestinian people were all showing solidarity together, we could have a huge impact on pushing back against U.S. The imperialist project of the United States, as well as the Israeli lobby.
Right. And you could even speak to there's been plenty of examples, both of you know about, of black politicians, black leaders who have taken that stand and they've paid the price for it in a major way, even if it's not, a stand that we would consider radical, but just even mild. It just shows the complete and utter control that, the AIPAC and the other arms of the Israel lobby has over the government. Bakari Sellers, I hate to admit on a personal note, when I was at the University of South Carolina, was a 22-year-old state representative that I had a chance to. His father was my professor, the kind of legendary Cleveland Sellers from SNCC, and it really breaks my heart to see the kind of trajectory his son has taken. But nonetheless, he has, and he's made those choices for himself. So anyways, we're going to go ahead and real quick go ahead and check the Julian Edelman video out, and then on the back end, we'll react. So here it is. All right. So that was Julian Edelman.
Maybe I'm in the wrong Google Doc here, but where it's down
the
Instagram video.
Yeah, the Instagram video. Yeah.
Let me just watch it real quick.
All right.
This will be edited out, obviously. All right.
We're gonna do this one with Oscar.
Everyone asking me about this Deshaun Jackson post. Everyone wanted to take some time before.
This is rich. Put it that way.
Be thoughtful. I wrote down some of my thinking. Seeing Deshaun play in his career, make outstanding football plays. We communicated over social media. I've got nothing but respect for his game. I know he said some ugly things, but I do see an opportunity to have a conversation. I'm proud of my Jewish heritage. And for me, it's not just about religion. It's about community,
Israel,
and culture as well. I'm unusual because I didn't identify as Jewish until later in my life. Whenever I encountered hatred, it never really felt like it was aimed at me. It was only after I was part of this community that I learned how destructive hate is. Anti-Semitism,
except when it's Palestinians,
the oldest forms of hatred. It's rooted in ignorance and fear. I remember experiencing a little bit of this hate in 2011 when I was called a kike on the football field. There's no room for anti-Semitism in this world. Even though we're talking about anti-Semitism,
it's one of those charges you can never verify, because it's just back in the day and nameless.
I think
come on, man.
Approaching a similarity is that they are both attacked by the ignorant and the hateful.
Oh, God.
It's really hard to see the challenges a community can face when you're not part of it. So what we need to do is we need to listen, we need to learn, we need to act. We need to have those uncomfortable conversations if we're going to have real change. So to that end, Deshaun, let's do a deal. How about we go to D.C. and I take you to the Holocaust Museum, and then you take me to the Museum of African American History and Culture. Afterwards, we grab some burgers and we have those uncomfortable conversations.
Mike, make sure your mic is like can you get it a little closer? Or
take care.
Yeah, so I mean, the thing that stuck out at me there is that first of all, he's wearing a hat that says Jew. I mean, I cannot imagine wearing a hat that says Jew.
Are we live now, or do you want to clap and then we'll go back to like officially being like, all right?
The thing that really stuck out at me there is he's wearing a hat that says Jew. Does it say Jets or Jew?
JE11. That's his brand that he sells
it looks like his hat
for.
Says, okay, man. It looks like his hat says Jew.
Well, maybe he's going for a little double entendre there, with
it's weird. And then he's got, the Magen David, the Star of David necklace on, and he's really playing up his Jewish identity. He says he came to being a Jew later in life because, honestly, in Jewish American culture, there's this reverence for any Jewish athlete they can find because there aren't that many Jewish professional athletes.
Hank Greenberg from the Detroit Tigers was lionized.
Yeah, there used to be because Bob, there used to be in the days of Bob Cousy in the NBA when Jews were coming in the country and they still lived in packed urban settings and they were, more blue collar. But, in my family, people started going to college and, business or whatever. And that's been the American Jewish experience. So there aren't that many Jewish athletes and he's one of the few in the NFL. So he, by playing up his Jewish identity becomes a marketing point and Jews all become, super worshipful of him. But, the most absurd thing about what he said, aside from the kind of equation of the situation of white Jewish people in the U.S. with the Black American condition or situation, which is just a completely ignores power relations, is that he invites DeSean Jackson to go to the Holocaust Museum and then he pledges to go to the Museum of African American History, as if the Holocaust Museum is a museum of Jewish history, when it's not. There was a conscious decision made, a political decision that was made to not have a museum of American Jewish history, which would have been awesome because we've made so many achievements in this country and accomplished so much and contributed so much to the culture, and to instead have this kind of monument to Jewish genocide that occurred thousands of miles away in Europe. And that institution has been heavily politicized. As I wrote in a recent piece about Syria, their Committee on Conscience is filled with neoconservative warmongers like Elliot Abrams, who's a straight up Iran-Contra felon. And the museum has been used as a forum to push sanctions on Syria. So Edelman is offering DeSean Jackson a heavily politicized experience where, Jewish culture will be seen through the framework of genocide, whereas African-American culture, while slavery is acknowledged in that museum, is, he's going to experience it in its totality. And it won't be that striking to him, especially, when you're a pro athlete and you're around Black Americans all the time, you kind of learn some things about the culture anyway. So really, this is just about disciplining DeSean Jackson. He's not offering anything from his own side. Right.
And just sort of I just thought I got to pop in because it's with DeSean Jackson, look, what he said is anti-Semitic. There's no doubt about it. But let's just try to look at the context. And I know there's going to be some people that will accuse me of even doing that is unforgivable. You hear all the people saying he, quoted Hitler, right? And they just kind of repeating that as if he consciously gets on there and just decides, I'm going to find an Adolf Hitler quote and just share it. Because, that's a good headline for our mainstream media, our clickbait media. All right. They want that. DeSean Jackson likes Hitler. Right. I mean, it's a joke. I think it was from a sermon that Farrakhan gave. And it's a lot of people in this time of this pandemic and being locked down and routines obliterated are trying to learn more things. Mike, you played ball at a high school inner city high school in Jacksonville, similar, our same hometowns. And there's a lot of athletes that grow up in the jock culture that, being an intellectual is not really a thing. And DeSean Jackson is grew up in Compton, California and LA. And, I'm not making assumptions that he's not smart, but I'm just saying that he might be diving in, trying to explore things. Right. And he made a mistake, right? But this whole analogy, the way that he's it's being framed as if the oppression of American Jews is analogous, like within this country, to the Black American experience of national oppression. And the look at the stats, just mass incarceration, the way interactions with police, housing. I mean, all these different metrics. It's not even an opinion, right? I mean, Jews have obviously been treated horribly, like historically in Europe, pogroms, anti-Semitic pogroms, the Nazis, horrific stuff. But like this equation, as if it's like, oh, well, let's just both see how we're oppressed. Like, I mean, it's problematic to say the least. And Mike, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to steal your role.
No, I think it's very, when you look at it, who's responsible for, let's say, the anti-Semitic shootings that have been happening. It's been white nationalists who also support Donald Trump in the White House and U.S. imperialist projects. Who's responsible for the slaughter of like African Americans and Black people and racist policies? Is the same kind of ruling class that is responsible for perpetuating anti-Semitism in this country. So Deshaun Jackson is not a part of that. Individuals, like you said, when you have folks who have, let's say, a criticism of the power structure and have this innate issue with like how society is running, of course they'll go to sources and knowledge bases. I mean, that's why 25% of the country believes that the Illuminati is the ruling force that kind of just, that runs the country, you know what I mean? Or believes in all these different conspiracy theories. And of course, these conspiracy theories aren't true, but it just reflects a yearning for knowledge from people like a Deshaun Jackson who, what he said was definitely inappropriate. I wouldn't have definitely Instagrammed that. I mean, and, he's dealing with the consequences of that, I guess, right now. But like you said, it's kind of a false equivalency that exists that, kind of has to be struggled through. And what, of course, the Zionist lobby is using that as an opportunity to possibly recruit Deshaun Jackson into the ranks, so he can be the one that's putting forth that narrative that they want to put out. I mean, you've had politicians like Ilhan Omar, as well as even the Black Lives Matter Network founders being accused of anti-Semitism, or famous Black activist Malcolm X and others who've always been accused of anti-Semitism due to their
Danny Glover, Harry Belafonte.
There's due to their solidarity with the Palestinian people. So anytime you show solidarity with the Palestinian people, you're going to get that charge from the Israeli lobby as being anti-Semitic, even though the Palestinians are also Semitic peoples. But that's the problem that we have in this country. There's been this delusion of identity to form the narrative of the imperialist project in the same way that, white national identity is used to fuel, let's say, the U.S. imperialist project. In a lot of ways, that has been co-opted by the Zionists, even with Jewish identity, to really fuel the Israeli project of imperialism and expansion into neighboring Arab land. So we've seen that narrative, and we just have to continue to combat it because it's just a silly one.
In a contemporary tone, we hear so much like, what is it now? The big thing, White Fragility, this book that's been like so widely read in this country. And then now it's like being criticized, essentially reducing race to, I think it's why, Max, I think I was down in DC, and I think we were reacting like to when we're seeing all these people in Bethesda, Maryland, like, I am like, we will come together and be good white allies and listen. It's like, now I get it. They all read that book. And what it is a lady who's gotten rich off of selling a corporate PR racket type narrative that you fight racism in an individualistic kind of way. So it doesn't threaten like their existence, like their privilege. You want to speak like that, or, any sort of class dynamic. So I don't want to get off
topic too much, but that was a pretty wild scene. It was at Connie Morella High School, which is named for a moderate Republican in one of the most affluent districts of the DC suburbs. And they, all of these white people got on their knees and put their hands up and atoned for their racial sins against Black people. That was their, contribution to the moment of the George Floyd. I don't know if Black people were asking for that, but that's what.
Mike, were you asking for that?
Like a religious ceremony.
No, whatever. Yeah, so was doing a bit too much. That's not.
Anyway, so as Max said, unless you have anything else, let's get back on track. But I think it is relevant, though. That's just a perfect example of just why it ties into why our culture is so reacts to something like Deshaun Jackson. Why we could have a discourse that's actually meaningful, but instead it's nothing but Julian Edelman and him meeting with Edward Mosberg, who we'll get to in a minute. But yeah, Max, what were you gonna say?
We had a similar incident here in Ward 8 in Southeast DC, which is the most still monolithically black district or ward in a city that was traditionally black, but which is now the most gentrified city in the country. And our council member, Trayon White, who was a sort of disciple of Marion Barry, he's been getting kind of involved with the Nation of Islam. It's kind of, tragic but that's kind of like one of the only organic resistance movements to the power structure in DC that actually has penetration down here, where people actually know about it and they respect Farrakhan. And he went on Facebook and said something about the Rothschilds creating a weather machine. It was really like a bizarre rant. And he wasn't specifically naming Jews, but then he came under this kind of insane communal discipline from self-appointed Jewish leaders. He was a rabbi from the suburbs, or not from the suburbs, but from a wealthy district in DC, broke into a city council meeting and just started screaming at him and accusing this young black man of threatening his life and threatening to kill Jews and putting his family in danger. It was the most obscene overreaction. And you see, anytime a black communal leader or celebrity goes off base a little bit, whether it's on the issue of Jews and they do something absurd like Trayon did or Deshaun Jackson did, or they express solidarity with Palestinians, their overreaction is in itself racist and bigoted. And there's this sense that Jewish communal leadership, which represents one of the most affluent, educated groups in the country, has the unlimited right to condescend and teach and discipline and punish these sort of marginalized young, usually black men and women. And it's just so ugly, and you can't even say anything about that. And just another thing that I was noticing today was a hashtag appeared, and I don't know if it was in reaction to the whole Deshaun Jackson incident or not, but it was hashtag Jewish privilege. And all of these Zionists and liberal Jews as well got together and started trying to push back against this hashtag by tweeting about incidents of discrimination, whether it was, Sarah Silverman saying her grandfather experienced, brutality in Europe, or comedians saying, well, I shouldn't talk about my Jewish identity. I was told that I wouldn't get gigs because that doesn't work here. And I'm like,
what, comedians?
No. Yeah, I saw some comedians saying that, and they trended the hashtag in reverse so that they were denying that Jewish privilege exists. Let's just face the fact. I'm privileged because, number one, I'm white. I mean, the Jewish experience in the U.S. is we're insiders and we're outsiders because, we're part of a group that isn't, WASP, white Christian, but we are basically a privileged group. We're super educated now. We're very generally wealthy as a community. And we have a second country that we have no actual connection to that we can go to, and we can displace Palestinians at will. In fact, Sarah Silverman's sister is a rabbi who lives in Jerusalem, I think in a home of a displaced, ethnically cleansed Arab family. So that's privilege. And in Israel, your privilege really is officially Jewish privilege. That's the essence of Zionism. But here are our privileges because we're white. So we have to constantly recognize the power imbalance. And when, even liberal American Jews try to deny their privilege, they create the opportunity for these kind of disgusting, very disturbing scenes where Black Americans who come from communities where there is no access to education or wealth are punished in a sadistic manner by Jewish communal leadership. And it only recreates and generates more anti-Semitism.
Right. So, wait, Mike, if you could, I know you're going to jump in, but you have that map behind you, and I think that's powerful. A map of it shows the deep South, and people hear this concept of the Black Belt South, right? And what they think. I think some people probably think, oh, that means Black people. I mean, it technically means the richness of the soil and those areas of darkness you see behind Mike's head there. correspond to like the highest growing, the most like fertile soil for cotton, which not coincidentally are the most heavily black populated counties of Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia there. And that really, you know, slavery and the transatlantic slave trade created like, you know, when you think of like what a nation is, like a sense of shared language and culture and a lot of characteristics that like make up a nation. There is an oppressed nation of Black Americans that like hail from there. There's a diaspora too in places like Chicago, New York, LA, all over. But maybe you could speak to that a little bit, because I think there's a lot of confusion on nationalism, especially on the left. Like people like are, you know, afraid to talk about it. But I think we do need to talk about the distinctions between oppressive like imperialist nationalism, settler colonial like nationalism like we see in Israel, and what we saw in South Africa, versus like oppressed nationalities like Palestinians and like, you know, African Americans in the United States today. And if you could, I don't know, whatever you wanted to say before that is fine, but I was hoping maybe you could like give a little context on that.
Yeah. I mean, let's go back to even a couple of years ago in Florida. We had there was a politician, state senator by the name of Dwight Bullard. He actually went on a delegation to Palestine with an organization here called the Dream Defenders, in which, you know, it was a Palestinian-led delegation. He actually lost his seat because the Zionist lobby was throwing all this BS at him, claiming that, the tour guide he was with was a former member of the PFLP and he was palling with terror, you know, shit like that, you know, bullshit like that. He actually lost his seat. And the Zionist lobby really united to push him out of office due to him showing support for Palestinian people and doing that delegation. Even here in Florida with the last gubernatorial election, there was an African-American man named Andrew Gillum who ran for governor. And he was actually, with the Dream Defenders, he was actually very supportive of the Dream Defenders when they first started, secure funds for them to get the first action in Sanford, you know, supported them in the Capitol.
And that was in the wake of Trayvon Martin's murder. In the wake of
Trayvon Martin, yeah. So the governor of Florida now, Governor Ron DeSantis, I don't know if you've ever read his history of being close to the Israel lobby. I mean, he did a cabinet meeting in Israel last week. The Florida cabinet did a meeting in Israel last year for a week. And as well, they have this scientific partnership that he's literally pushed forth with Florida universities with Israel. So you have Israeli universities that have programs in Florida public colleges and vice versa. And the crazy part is they actually pushed out the Chinese exchange program at a local university in Jacksonville in exchange.
That's so fitting for this time we're in right now.
It is fitting for the time, but like I was talking about, that gubernatorial race, that was a charge that the Zionist lobby labeled against Andrew Gillum as well. This young black, you know, he's a Democrat, centrist Democrat, but he would have been the first black governor of Florida, and he was labeled as anti-Semitic, even though he also stood against the BDS movement.
He enthusiastically supports Israel.
He does, you know what I mean? But he wasn't to the liking of, because of his association with this Black liberation youth group that supports the Palestinian cause. I mean, and especially in the South, in the Black Belt, like you was talking about, you know, Atlanta being one of those states, you know, AIPAC lobby targeting Morehouse, targeting Clark Atlanta University, targeting these historically Black universities, which are based in the South, to really target those young emerging Black leaders who will support the Zionist lobby and all their future plans. So it's a very calculated strategy that's been put into place and has been working for a long time. But I also think the Zionist lobby is on their last leg, which is why they have to use these acts like Deshaun Jackson sharing like a pretty shitty Instagram post, but ballooning that to be like, oh, we're in a time of Black Lives Matter. What about all these other lives and all this shit? Like, y'all don't give a shit about, you know what I mean? Like, that's the narrative that they're pushing to try to use this moment in time to really support the agenda of the Zionist lobby.
Absolutely. And just quickly about the Black Belt Nation, like, I mean, what that is, and like kind of like any connections or parallels you might see with like the Palestinian struggle.
Oh, for sure. Like, it's our contention is a Black Belt. This is where you have the highest concentrations of African Americans in the nation. Up to 50% of the African Americans who live in this United States live in the Black Belt South, in the South. And this is also where you have large counties of a majority African American population who have also been disenfranchised from the land. There's no coincidence that in the South is also where you have the most Confederate statues existing. It's kind of like, I kind of compare it to, Dylan Roof. He was the white supremacist mass murderer who shot into that church and murdered a lot of African-American people in Charleston. Well, he had two flags. He had the Confederate flag and he had the Rhodesian flag. Of course, Rhodesia was the white settler state before Zimbabwe, before they had their liberation movement. So one can literally see that the Confederacy wasn't in fact that type of state, a very racist, minority rule kind of state that used the most egregious amounts of oppression to keep slaves in line. And even after the fact, you had radical reconstruction, which was going to be actually the creation of a new, of a democratic nation in the United States, and especially in the South, of a Black nation. You saw what's the Hayes-Tilden Compromise, and you saw the withdrawal of federal troops from the South, which assured that the Klan and all these former racist landowners who fought for the Confederacy could come back into power, and they've been running the South ever since. Through Jim Crow and through all these slave codes and all these other legislation. So the similarities to that with the Palestinian struggle is very much there, which is why, as a Black person myself from the South, I show solidarity with the Palestinian struggle and what they go through, because we are a part of an oppressed nation that hasn't gotten liberation, which is why, and our leadership in a lot of ways, similar to maybe in Palestine, has been bought off by the Zionist lobby in a lot of ways that folks would, in part of the Palestinian movement, would also say has existed. So that's why we stand in solidarity with each other. And that's why there's a huge emerging, and especially in the past 5 years, of this Black and Arab Palestinian solidarity, which has grown so much in the last couple of years, because Black people are becoming more knowledgeable to the oppression that other oppressed nationalities are facing worldwide. And we're kind of seeing that the same enemy that oppresses us and murders us on the streets of Chicago, Atlanta, Jacksonville is also using the same weapons, the same prison companies, the same tanks that are oppressing Palestinians in Palestine, in occupied Palestine.
Right. So, Mike, I know you have another call coming up. You've had quite a Zoom day. It sounds like at 9:00, right? So, I mean, if you got a jet now, I totally understand. We're gonna continue to go ahead and watch a couple clips of Josh Norman, especially. I want to zone in on. Now, maybe before you go, you can say something about maybe Josh Norman, but just real quick to react to what Mike said, to summate that.
No, play the clip.
All right. Well, all right. We'll play the clip, but. All right. Go ahead. Here's the clip. And Josh Norman, Adrian Peterson, and Zionist warriors for, I don't know. You can make up your own mind, and we'll react on the backside.
Wait, I need to watch this shit.
Here it is. There, I got it. I got it queued up.
Peterson and quarterback Josh Norman, who just reportedly signed with the Buffalo Bills, are now returning from Israel after a very unique experience. The pair, who played together for 2 years, first arrived in Israel as participants in the International First Robotics Competition and in partnership with Robo Active 369, an Israeli high school organization. But after the competition, they also participated in training exercises with the IDF, running obstacle courses with soldiers, taking lessons in Krav Maga, and even receiving military briefs on the threats against Israel. So how was it? Well, Norman says that it's amazing to get in there.
I want to touch on all these fucking cops train with each other.
All right. Yeah. So are you gonna stay on for a minute?
Yeah, I'll stay on.
Yeah. You react to this one.
Yeah, I'll stay on.
Max, I knew this was gonna just explode your brain.
I haven't seen it yet.
He's visited 3 or 4 times already. Wears a tie or a white necklace and is even considering moving here. And of course,
Are you watching on your screen now or not?
No. Hold on.
Washington Redskins running back Adrian Peterson and cornerback Josh Norman, who just reportedly signed with the Buffalo.
Was that Peterson and Norman?
Yeah, Adrian Peterson and Josh Norman, who's now on the Buffalo Bills. And Norman, I have another one I'm going to queue up after that, just where he's got a whole contingent.
All right, play the other one. Just intro it now.
All
Just
right. Here
and intro.
all right, here we go. Well, then we react to both of them at the same time. All right.
But you know, you say, I want to bring in another one because it's even crazier. And
All right. I want to bring in another video. If you didn't think Josh Norman was crazy enough, was enthusiastic enough for Zionism and wanting to move to Israel and wanting to, all his training with the IDF, bringing Adrian Peterson with him, don't worry. We have plenty more. Now he is official Israel tour guide. And here is him at Ben Gurion International Airport in Tel Aviv, ready to take you on your Israel adventure. Enjoy.
Hold on. I'm going to watch this.
Hey guys, just a couple of
Oh my God.
big surprise for you. 7 of the top 100 NFL players are coming to Israel.
Mike, you seen this one yet?
I've seen one in my arm.
Yeah. I thought so too, but
What's it?
it's the one, it says more Josh Norman on display.
This shit is crazy.
With Hebrew subtitles.
Josh Norman, cornerback, Washington Redskins. Nick Beasley, linebacker, NFL. The only pair of Jewish brothers in the NFL. Mitchell and Jeff, the Schwartz brothers.
The Schwartz brothers.
The only Jewish brothers in the NFL. See how cool Israel is? Like they had it's like Israel jock culture now.
But thank you, Robert Kraft.
Oh yeah, he's behind all of this, man.
Oh yeah.
All right, I got it. I think you should when you bring it in, you should just show like the first minute before he's.
Yeah. The first that's fine.
The first 30 seconds.
I wanted to ask your take on that anyway. So all right.
But
Sounds good.
we could just bring Mike in.
All right, here we go. So I'm gonna clap. All right, so we just got a double dose of Josh Norman, kind of giving us our nice Israeli propaganda / tour guide, travel concierge, sort of all inclusive Israel from top to bottom, or is it Palestine? I don't know. Mike, what's your take on what we just watched there with Josh Norman and his wonderful sort of tourism ministry position? It seems like he's now appointed to.
Yeah, it just feels like I just watched, someone get throat punched and then kicked down the stairs. It's absolute,
Yeah, we're kind of self-loathing here on this show.
Absolute travesty. I mean, this, I'm not sure who made this budget of this video, by the way, but it was like literally just him at an airport just talking about, I'm in Israel, I'm in occupied Palestine. But it kind of shows the insidious nature of the agenda of Bob Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots, who's a hardcore Zionist, who's led these delegations of NFL players and really using the NFL as a means to recruit a lot of high-profile African-American athletes into supporting the Israeli agenda in their lobby. And this is all while, there's reports that have been out for years of the NYPD actually has a branch in occupied Palestine in Israel. They train together, as well as police departments like the Minneapolis Police Department, who of course murdered George Floyd.
DC Metro Police. Yeah.
DC Metro Police, all these different police departments, even in Jacksonville, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office training with the IDF forces. So it's kind of like the same tactics that the Israelis use against the Palestinians, these brute, aggressive, tactics. There's no coincidence that these tactics are used here in the U.S. I mean, I'm sure the U.S. teaches them a thing or two about oppressing people and locking people up. And the fact that you have so many weapons of mass destruction on the streets, like certain tear gas canisters, certain things that in other countries are actually illegal, are actually used in Israel against the Palestinians. When I was in Ferguson, they tear gas people, and I got a little bit of tear gas. I went to a gas station down the street, talked to a Palestinian store owner, and he was like, use the onion, the tear gas they use here isn't shit compared to what they use in Palestine. So he saw the connection. I mean, these are the same weapons that they use on black protesters protesting against police shootings. They're using on Palestinians as well. And as well, these same private prison corporations like G4S, which locks up and incarcerates African Americans here in these private prisons and lobbies for laws that criminalize more black people. They're also the same prison companies that are locking up Palestinians and Palestinian youth in Israel and Palestine and oppressing them and passing and pushing for more grotesque laws there to further criminalize Palestinians. So the connection is there between the oppressors in both occupied Palestine and as well as in the United States.
Yeah, it's almost like they test out how far they can go on Palestinians, right? And then that's sort of like their little lab rat grunt. I hate to say that, it's like as terrible as that sounds. That's how they view it, right? And then they bring this stuff, back here, and it's sort of like it's just like Mike was saying, and it feels like you're getting thrown down the stairs. It's like I always think nothing shocks me anymore, and then something does, right? And something's just crazy. I mean, Josh Norman went to Vanderbilt University. He's not stupid. Is it just as simple as him being like cynically like bought off, kind of like Amari Stoudemire is in the NBA, or is it, or some people, is it the religious aspect that people get hooked on, sort of like the Christian Zionism? I mean, what do you think someone like Josh Norman, who's not like, there's other guys, we could point to down at jocks that I would be like, oh, that guy's not very, just not very smart. But like Josh Norman's not in that category. So like, I mean, I know we can't get inside his head, but like, either of y'all can hop in. Where does this come from?
Well, Amari Stoudemire was kind of getting into the religious dimension because you have the Black Hebrews who are near Dimona in Israel, who are Black Americans who basically are denied, for the most part, citizenship and are doing everything they can to collaborate with the state in order to justify their existence near Jerusalem, which is part of their kind of religious messianism. And so they got stuck by the nuclear plant, the secret nuclear plant in Israel, which isn't inspected by the IAEA. They all eat kelp to try to offset the effects of radiation. And Amari Stoudemire got in with them. It's like when Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown went to visit Israel, and they all went and met with them. And it was one of the weirdest trips ever. Then Ariel Sharon demanded a meeting with them, but Whitney and Bobby refused to shake his hand. It's pretty funny video. But Amari Stoudemire also was trying, it was kind of smart on his part from a career standpoint. He was fading in the NBA. His defense was fucking garbage.
Maybe the worst defensive, like, big man. I mean, I don't know.
The worst defensive. He was just he was like Jello in the paint. And in Israel, they have a very vibrant basketball culture. They're pretty good. Yeah. It produced the Cleveland's assistant coach to LeBron. What was that?
Well, he was their head coach, David Blatt.
No, I'm joking. I'm just.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
He was like LeBron's water boy. But exactly. Anyway, so Amari Stoudemire gets into he finds a second life in his career. The same with the rapper Shine, who, after he took the fall for P. Diddy and went to jail for a while, he comes back as an Orthodox Jew, like an ultra Orthodox Jew. And he's got, the payas and everything. And he's like wearing the whole garb. And he became a star in the ultra Orthodox community when before he was like a third or fourth rate rapper whose career had basically been decimated in prison because Diddy's lawyers just did him in. So now you have Josh Norman, who, as you said, he's not a stupid guy. He's smart enough to see the opportunity. And in the NFL, getting in with Israel, it's kind of like a form of class collaboration in the plantation system, because who is the master in the NFL? I'm Jewish, so I just don't feel afraid to say it, but a disproportionate number of the owners are Jewish, starting right here at the Washington team, Daniel Snyder, who is like donated $1 million to Trump. But these guys like to see.
Stephen Ross, the Miami Dolphins, is like a New York City, just I think either slumlord or just terrible.
He gets his money from angle drilling in Palestinian territories for water.
Oh, Ross does?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I didn't even know that, but I think, it comes from a careerist perspective. And then there's just the other added dimension of getting free trips and free stuff in an exotic, faraway place. Just like every incoming freshman member of Congress gets a free trip to Israel. And it's like you were selling like lawnmowers in Texas and pool equipment or something. And then you get a seat in some safe Republican district. And the next thing you know, you and your whole family get a free trip to Jerusalem. And like, man, I swam in the Sea of Galilee.
Yeah. Well, who doesn't want to get wined and dined? And the thing is, like, oppressed people don't have the financial resources like imperialist countries to use that leverage to really push people and recruit.
Yeah, no doubt. And so I mean, there's so many things. I mean, with this, it's hard to even. I want to get into the Bob Kraft stuff next. I mean, but in terms of all this stuff with like Josh Norman. The whole list of players like Adrian Peterson, these guys, there is a class collaborationist dimension to it. There's no doubt about it. It's just, it's also, there's a religious aspect that, the church and the Black community, especially in rural settings in the South, is a big deal. It's kind of like why a guy like Dabo Swinney at Clemson, who's a huge evangelical, is able to appeal to like a lot of like Black mothers that, the church is a big part of their life and Christian faith. And it's sort of like what Zionism's decided. And it's like why we see the ridiculous, like on the surface, seemingly relationships with like anti-Semitic Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban and other anti-Semitic Eastern European leaders that are openly pro-Israel. Nonetheless, they are denied. They want to like basically hold up people that were Nazi collaborators and as national heroes. We see this in the Ukraine during the Maidan Revolution. So the contradictions are crazy. So with regards to like Norman and the video we're going to get ready to see right here is like a different one, but it comes from the Trinity Broadcasting Network, and it shows a real messianic trip where like, a lot of NFL players, mostly Black players, being baptized in the River Jordan. And you see just how powerful those stories are. I mean, especially the story of slavery in the U.S. context, and when you look at Exodus and the idea of being led out of slavery into freedom, and the analogies you see that are made, and then how terrible our education system is in our media. And I think that combining what I just said with what Max and Mike just said, we sort of see how this stuff comes to pass. So we're going to check out a video real quick from the Trinity Broadcasting Network showing a real messianic example of what we're talking about, and then we'll pick it up on the backside. All right, so I don't know if you want to watch it real quick. I'm going to
just skim it real quick.
Yeah. Mike, you got to bounce?
Yeah.
All right, appreciate it, man. Yeah.
All right, talk to y'all later.
All right, bro. Yeah.
Wait, is this the Watchman or is this
it's the Watchman guy, I think. They're getting like baptized in the River Jordan and stuff, and
at the end.
They have gone through for really chosen joy.
It's just I can't even.
Bible says what the enemy meant for bad, God will turn around for good. And the Jewish people.
I'm one of the 2 thumbs down you see on YouTube there.
In this place, it just strengthens your faith.
I've been baptized once before, but to renew my vows, to renew my faith with my brothers that I've played with in the NFL has been a tremendous privilege to walk with them, to be a part of their
shitbag
lives,
kicker Matt Stover.
Even closer, and that bond even closer than we had before.
Wow, what an inspiring story to see those NFL players in the Holy Land.
Listen to how this finishes up.
For themselves, like firsthand. Well, up next, my final thoughts on the threats gathering on Israel's borders.
No, let him play the last like five or 10 seconds of that.
Against all odds, continues to persevere. It's the Watchman. It's Christians United for Israel. Only right here on TBN. Easy. Stick around.
I mean, it just combines all of it right there, man. Like messy. I mean,
are we rolling?
Yeah, no, all right, here we go. Clap here. So
start that way.
All right, Max. So what was your take after seeing whatever that was, messianic insanity there?
Well, it's all right there, right?
It is. It's sort of self-explanatory. I mean, but
well, I guess just some context. This is a show that's sponsored by Christians United for Israel, which was spun out of the main Israel lobby group AIPAC to cater to Christian Zionist evangelicals in the heartland. And so it appears that Christians United, I mean, they're run by this guy, Pastor John Hagee from the Cornerstone Church in San Antonio. He's someone who, I mean, he's a charismatic Pentecostal, and his preaching is pretty off the wall. If you just watch any random clip from him,
I'll recommend checking out Max's video he did. I think when you were researching for Republican Camorra, and
yeah, just go on YouTube.
It's one of the most insane things I've ever seen.
Yeah, just go on YouTube and watch Rapture Ready, my video on going to their annual summit in Washington. And I would go up and ask their members, you know, are you looking forward to Armageddon? They would say, I'm looking forward to Armageddon and the cleansing of the earth, just one after another. You know, they believe that the Jews have to basically be pushed out of wherever they live in the diaspora and gather in Jerusalem in order for biblical revelation to be fulfilled and for the Messiah to return. And this will be prefaced by several dispensations like a war of Gog and Magog, which they see as the U.S. and Israel fighting Russia, China, and Iran. I mean, it's just it's like Las Vegas, like ridiculous John Birch Society combined with you know, biblical revelation, eschatology. It's like the cheapest version of evangelical Christianity on the market. And, you know, it caters to a lot of these players. Like there's the baptism in the Sea of Galilee or in the Jordan River. Yeah. But there's also the political dimension for a lot of the, you know, and a lot of the white players in the NFL are Republicans. They're right wing. They're like pro-military. So you have, you know, how do y'all do it? How do you Jews survive with all of these threats on your
barbarians on your borders there, just thirsting to take you out, right? I mean, I don't know. I just have to jump in because not to get too conspiratorial, but I mean, if you were a hardcore anti-Semite, if you're David Duke, if you're like these people that, you know, ironically, let's not forget, like anti-Semites like Richard Spencer like the idea of Zionism because they like ethno-states. They like the idea of like, if you're a white nationalist, sure, like let the Jews go somewhere else, right? And it's sort of creepy when you're thinking of it in this like eschatology type of way. The idea of people that are like John Hagee, who's a known anti-Semite, and these other known anti-Semites who profess love for Israel, telling the Jews to go to all one place as if like, if they were, it's almost like they wanted it be a perfect recipe to annihilate him or something.
Well, I mean, it's just really quickly. I mean, Hagee has said that the Antichrist, well, first of all, he said that Hitler was a hunter and that he was part of this biblical revelation that will bring the Jews to Israel, that Hitler basically helped fulfill biblical prophecy. And so Hitler was kind of a biblical figure, and the Holocaust needed to happen in his view. Why is that less controversial than what a black NFL player says on Facebook sharing some ridiculous anti-Semitic meme?
Right. Who honestly, it's like an Instagram story that he just reshares quickly. It's not okay, but let's look at power dynamics. I think Max and Mike mentioned it earlier. I mean, who is in a position to actually have the power to do things? It's people like Donald Trump. It's Bibi Netanyahu. It's people that like this, that run organizations, that sponsor, that send out, and I'll get into this in my part here later, but on this guy Mosberg, who's you know, a Holocaust survivor, and you know, that's not my obviously what he's been through is horrible, but like they're rolling people out and they're cynically exploiting the Holocaust and Jewish suffering, and in a way that's purely about you know, the building public consensus and opinion around the idea that Israel has to, you know, we see annex the West Bank now. It's always the goalposts are getting further and further. And where's the end game now? And it's like now Deshaun Jackson becoming reformed is essentially him going to meet with this guy, you know, Mosberg, who in all honesty was indicted by Chris Christie here in New Jersey, became a multi-millionaire real estate guy. Christie's campaign didn't even want to rent commercial real estate space from him because of his like reputation in 2013, because so it just shows you that this guy is now, he's brought on shows. He's now considered the guy that Deshaun Jackson, a 33-year-old black guy from Compton, needs to talk to in order to, like, I guess, pay his penance, right, to society and get back in the good graces of Jeffrey Lurie, the Eagles owner, and Howie Roseman, their GM. And it's just a sad reality that instead of talking to Max, maybe you could mention some of the other great, like, American Jews who've done great things politically in art and culture and politics that he could meet with and learn a whole lot more and have it be a lot more meaningful. So that's what really just upsets me about the whole thing. And,
Mike, you want to weigh in?
Mike had to tap out. He's activist / commentator. So I just wanted to close on something positive, though. There's I'm going to put it up now. The Electronic Intifada piece we'll have on the screen. It's a 2017 piece, and it's basically about, like, NFL players, like, pull out of the propaganda tour that was sponsored by Kraft and was led by Michael Bennett first doing it after he read up on what it was and how he was essentially going to be exploited. And he really, and if you read his book, Things That Make White People Uncomfortable, along with, like, Dave Zirin, you'll really see kind of Bennett's transformation. He started this event, like, it really bothered him once he realized what he was about to take part in, if it weren't for, certain people kind of helping him learn what was going on. And a few things from the piece, you see that Michael Bennett, the letter he wrote, he said, "Dear world, I was shocked to make a visit. I was scheduled to make a visit to Israel with fellow NFL players. I was excited to see this remarkable and historic part of the world with my own eyes. I was not aware until reading this article about the trip and the times of Israel that my itinerary was being constructed by the Israeli government for the purposes of making me, in the words of a government official, a, quote, influencer and opinion former, who would then be an ambassador, quote, ambassador of goodwill. I will not be used in such a manner. When I do go to Israel, and I plan to go, it will be to see not only Israel, but also the West Bank and Gaza, so I can see how the Palestinians, who have called this land home for thousands of years, live their lives. One of my heroes has always been Muhammad Ali. I know that Ali always stood strongly with the Palestinian people, visiting refugee camps, going to rallies, and always willing to be a voice for the voiceless. I want to be a voice for the voiceless, and I cannot do that by going on this kind of trip to Israel. I know that this will anger some people and inspire others, but please know that I did this not for you, but to be in accord with my own values and my own conscience. Like 1968 Olympian John Carlos always says, there is no partial commitment to justice. You are either in or you're out. Well, I'm in. Sincerely, Michael Bennett, longtime NFL defensive end. So there's hope, along with Kenny Stills, the receiver from the Miami Dolphins at the time, who backed out of the trip too. NFL running back Justin Forsett also backed out of the trip, along with Michael Bennett. And Michael Bennett's brother, Martellus Bennett, tight end, backed out of the trip. Kenny Stills was then traded from the Miami Dolphins after criticizing his owner for his relationship with Trump, while also in fundraising for Trump, while also claiming to support Black Lives Matter.
And that's all before the George Floyd protests, which have really, I think, given a lot of space to people within pro sports, but especially the most reactionary sport, the NFL, to express themselves. And so I think you're going to see players start to wonder why we have to care so much about this country 7,000 miles away when we can, like, actually talk about what's going on in the communities we come from, and the plantation system that we exist in, the sort of corporate plantation that's been set up in the NFL. You can already see the NBA kind of, it feels like a David Stern move or something, but they're really trying to co-opt the players. And so they're letting them wear officially corporate approved messages on the back of their shirts. And I mean, some of them are so bizarre, like education reform and group economics, which I guess is code for black capitalism.
Right.
But it's really, you can wear your little slogan, or, if you're a white ally, your jersey can say ally, but you can't choose anything that isn't corporate approved. But we're giving you this space to be a part of this protest movement, and we're hoping that it doesn't really go too far and start actually challenging the real power dynamics in the league, which speak to the whole capitalist system. Such as the guy over my shoulder there, Craig Hodges, who has literally lost his whole, livelihood as an NBA player because he was ahead of his time. Sadly, he didn't have any movement backing. And when he wanted to
boycott the game one of the 91 NBA finals, Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan. Can you imagine the collective power there? I mean, he cites in his book a situation in the 1963 NBA All-Star game. First time it was ever going to be on TV, televised nationally. And guys like Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, I think Bob Cousy was in there, and Oscar Robertson mainly. They, right before the game, decide they're not going to leave the locker room after they had warmed up, right? So they leveraged their power at the right moment. And this is back before athletes made a lot of money. There wasn't all glamorous. They had to have all kinds of second jobs in the offseason. And that action right there, the owners met every one of their demands, for to have some retirement security. I forget all of them off the top of my head, but nonetheless, they leveraged their power in the right way, and it broke Hodges' heart that kind of power, multiracial power you saw there. They recognized what was capable, and yet in the early 90s, he was on a team. He basically admitted in Jordan and Scottie Pippen, guys like Horace Grant, who knew next to nothing about their own history, and as a result, he got kind of tossed out, and that's just sort of what you see, I guess. And thankfully now we have more voices, and hopefully we'll be moving to a better space. But real quick, we didn't get in on Bob Kraft just specifically. I mean, he's really the guy who's like kind of engineered this whole dynamic of bringing Tom Brady over. Brady even had on his beanie on the sideline of a game a few years ago with an Israel flag and a U.S. flag together. He and Edelman, have been this dynamic duo. They've had this relationship with Trump that's been very close. There's, Kraft has engineered this whole dynamic. And I want to show like a little just excerpt of an NFL Films just piece they did just to show the insanity of this and just how just normalized it is. I mean, Marshall Faulk actually comes on here, Hall of Fame running back, and talks about, when I first heard of a black man wanting to go on a trip to the Middle East, I wasn't in at first, but now that I've come and I see how great this is, I was wrong, and it's just like Kraft is just there with like an entourage of Hall of Famers, of Jim Brown, even Chris Carter, just Joe Montana. I mean, Falk, all these current players, and they're just gushing over him. And this is a guy, let's not forget, who's used massive legal firepower to help basically suppress the evidence of him going in and out, and also being videotaped, receiving, having basically, going to a massage parlor for sex that was being investigated for international sex trafficking, human trafficking. And
when it comes to improving the U.S.-Israeli special relationship or patronizing massage parlors, Bob Kraft can really pull it off.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's got it. I mean, evidently that
he's a really hands-on guy.
He's very hands-on, and he wants he's hands-on. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and he has a lot of tolerance for jerks.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's kind of, Bill Belichick, is his buddy there. Right. But he's really what makes him especially evil. I feel like it's just, he really is a good communicator, and he makes people feel important and that they matter when they're speaking to him, and they have his undivided attention. And you see him and why he's been successful in that way. And the fact that it's so cynical, and we see that, and that he basically right after the time when they had the damning evidence on him that his attorneys have been able to get suppressed through technicalities, he just hopped on his private jet and flew out to the AFC Championship game to watch his Patriots, win and go on to another Super Bowl where they, beat the Rams year before last. So, I mean, the level of wealth is just so beyond anything we can comprehend. But again, I don't. Despite that, there is hope. There's players like Kaepernick, what he did in what is
there.
Really
there's an effort to co-opt him right now through Disney allowing him to have like a social justice show. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that? Is there any way he can do that without being bought and sold out, or is it pretty much is that the kiss of death, you think?
I mean, we'll see what the show looks like, but it seems like once you enter the once the corporations start opening the door for you and you take it. I mean, he already took a big Nike deal,
right?
And you want to displace the lost wealth from your career being destroyed because you took a stand.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he gets to have his he gets to have his cathartic moment on the show. But what kind of conception of social justice does Disney want to impart to people? I mean, how far is it going to go? I mean, I talked with Aaron Mate on his show Pushback, which, you know, it should be out by the time this is out at the Grayzone, about the co-optation of the Black Lives Matter protests. I mean, before they were Black Lives Matter, it was Ferguson, and it was people rioting in Ferguson, people really directly confronting cops. And then these activists came in who were sort of professional activists. Right. They were from
DeRay McKesson.
Well, DeRay's the most extreme example, but I mean, right. I even pointed to blacklivesmatter.com, which is sort of the official NGO wing of the movement,
right,
which is very controlled and very connected to the Democratic Party. And it's just filling up with foundation cash right now. And if you look at their website, besides their gigantic merchandise section, it's they have this 2020 initiative, which is all about voting. And it's just like vote.
It's always the same, right? It's just, I mean, it's
sheepdogging for the Democrats. And
right.
Alicia Garza, who is one of the 5 founders, I think, or 3 founders, she was very vocally endorsing Elizabeth Warren. I mean, what kind of radical change or class struggle is that going to produce just because Elizabeth Warren has some wonky solutions? So this is, I mean, to me, it's like what Mike was talking about, where, you know, the historically Black college class presidents are groomed by the Israel lobby, not exactly knowing what they're getting into. And then all of a sudden, all these career opportunities and networking opportunities are presented, and you become a careerist. You start suppressing your own inclination to dissent in order to keep that going, because what's the alternative? It's not very good. And that's what the nonprofit industrial complex does within activist circles. And it's what corporations do within the already hyper corporatized professional sports world with endorsements. I mean, everybody knows that you don't make most of your money on the field. You make it through endorsements. Right. So find your brand, make it a social justice brand, and then that can be lucrative as well. But it plays a role in getting you to limit how far you're going to go.
Right. The NFL has, like, what they do is my cause, my cleats. And for Julian Edelman last year, it was Israeli baseball. He's had other ones. It's like Israel and community. There's in one of the clips, like that I was watching, to get ready for this, one of a player who's a fringe guy. I don't even know if he's in the league anymore. I can't even think of his name. But nonetheless, he talked about going to Israel for the first time. And it was like the biggest thing that struck him, and Max, you could probably speak to this, is like the just how much they just the zealous, like, just love for Israel, the flags draped over your shoulders and everyone's dancing around, and it's like they're high on Zionism. And I know when you were like researching for Goliath, you talked about going and like seeing some of the birthright trips, and also just in certain crowds where people would gather, and you saw like the reaction David Sheen got and that Feeling to Hate in Tel Aviv thing he did, where he was basically assaulted, and it's like, it's because they feel like this community is so special, and it's like so worth protecting, that like whatever has to be done, whoever could be like not part of that is somehow the other, in like the most in a sense where it gets so crazy and next level that like you have what you have in Gaza with like people with like operating remote controlled machine guns just mowing people down, detached from life, who can also then just go out and probably just dance around and be high on Zionism too. But
I think the religious component is really central. Israel's left wing and liberals' base of support in the U.S. is completely collapsing. The liberal Zionist gatekeeper of my generation, Peter Beinart, has pretty much given up on a 2-state solution. I mean, he's not going to go towards BDS, and I'm sure he'll continue kind of limiting the space, but he's definitely showing where liberals or self-styled progressives are going on Israel. I mean, this is someone who comes from a much more religiously Jewish background than me. And, he's kind of done with the whole idea of an exclusivist Jewish state. And so many others of my generation, younger generation, they're done. So Israel's moving more towards religious Christians. Christian Zionism's becoming a priority. The Republican Party's the new future base of Israel. And then, I mean, of course, you have all these bought off Democrats like Nancy Pelosi or like Chuck Schumer. He believes in it, and he's bought
Joe
off.
Biden.
Yeah,
Really
Biden. I mean, whatever. And the right wing Democrats like Biden, but the future, in blue safe districts in urban settings, you're going to have like AOC types who are like not exactly pro-Israel,
or Jamal Bowman, who won't even endorse BDS, I believe.
Yeah, they'll never endorse BDS. That's not now, but they're not exactly showing up at AIPAC and going on the free trips. Right. So, and they can't. They'll pay a price actually with their own constituents. So that's a new thing. So the point is, with Israel catering to that audience, that constituency, people believe you're in a Christian Protestant church, even if it isn't a right-wing Pentecostal charismatic church like the kind that John Hagee runs, you learn that Israel is covenant land and that God made a covenant with the Jews that this would be their land. That's just sort of foundational to the mainstream Christian faith in the United States. So these proto-Zionist messages are implanted. And then you go even further, then you take the Israel trips, which are really structured in a very sophisticated way. The birthright trips that are free trips for Jewish American youth now will give them some kind of social justice experience, or they'll cater to, skaters or gamers or whoever.
Or maybe they could bring him to some protest about the fact that you can't afford any housing in Tel Aviv or something like that.
Yeah, and they did that when there were in 2011, when there were social justice protests that were like intra-Jewish inside Israel. The birthright trips were kind of like, yeah, see, there's this debate in Israel. It's a democracy. Isn't that beautiful? So they do that, but the religious point of view that dominates the future base of international Israel support lends itself to fascism, because
Christian fascism, especially.
Well, yeah, but also Zionist fashion, Christian. Right. And once you adopt that point of view, the sheer humanity of Palestinians is off the table, and you can compartmentalize then whenever Israel is carpet bombing the Gaza Strip and liquidating entire families in multi-level homes. It's off the table. It kind of reminds me also of, when I was in Honduras a year ago, and I asked like a Honduran leftist about how all of these guys come from the slums to join the Honduran military and participate in all of these repressive operations, and assassinations as well of activists. Right. And he said, they get first into evangelical Christianity, and they learn there that communists are satanic. And then they're told that we're all communists, all of us protesting for justice and against this like narco regime that's running the country. And so they don't even see us as humans. They see exterminating us as a kind of religious duty. And by the way, the Honduran government is one of the most pro-Israel in Latin America, because that's how they get, the aid from the U.S. And they showed up at the coronation of the breaking ground of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. Right. So it's just one fascistic mentality that's gone international, and at the center of it is support for Israel.
Yeah, I mean, a couple things real quick, and I just got to hit on this. I think I meant to earlier, and it's that, Edward Mosberg again, and like he made a comment on Huckabee's show, and again, just to build on what Max said about the relationship with Christian Zionism and Zionism in general, that it's going to be more in that Trinity Broadcasting Network type. I mean, we look at those clips, and they seem crazy and whatnot, and we think those are it's kind of fringe, but I mean, you look at like, middle America, and you look at like the way people are feeling, people that feel totally like they've been promised something, that the post-World War II sort of American dream is like, it's been in decline, but it's like in this COVID context now, and now post George Floyd, it's like, I mean, someone in my neighborhood recently just kind of casually talking, just tell me basically that he just thought America wasn't a country for the whites anymore, and in a sad, somber tone. And this is a guy living in one of the most diverse cities in the U.S., like maybe the most, in Jersey City. And it just struck me. It's like like as if he felt like he was emasculated or something by making this admission. And it's like, and I wanted to push, but it's like this guy is just like, I hate to say lost cause, but I mean, the reality is somebody like that is reflecting the way that these monuments coming down to the Confederacy, even if they're from the North or whatever. And it's like for them and things being knocked down and them seeing this stuff on Fox News about Chaz. And I was at this protest in New York City by City Hall, and it's like an autonomous zone type thing there. And they're seeing these things happen. And it's like their little perfect white picket fence America that it's never really been that like reality, but that they've maybe had elements of and had this belief that things were always getting better is not they're having that realization. So now they're looking into more and more bizarre sort of religious sects that get into like looking for new answers. And that's going to be, I think, the troubling trend as we see going forward. But Max, you brought up Honduras. Like I really would urge people on the left to really educate themselves on this, because whenever you get people are coming at you about, Venezuela or Nicaragua or Cuba or international solidarity for anti-imperialist countries or Palestine, point out Honduras, a country that in 2009, they just like coup d'etat Manuel Zelaya, the democratically elected president, put in a narco dictator, Juan Orlando Hernandez. These people are all on Twitter, just like posting Trump memes and stuff every day and bizarre Christian, fascist type language. Their response to COVID is very much just like following whatever Trump says and implementing it. They don't have a public health system. Like people are fleeing the country because it's like there's no real economy outside of like, I guess tourism and the government and whatnot. And it's just an utter disaster. So much so that people are willing to risk their lives fleeing through Mexico and trying to have coyotes take them across the border and whatnot. And yet we hear nothing about this in the U.S. media. We don't hear anything whatsoever. So if Deshaun Jackson would have come out and made some comment about, supporting Juan Orlando Hernandez, he would have faced next to no criticism, nothing. And this is a guy that even the right-wing Organization of American States, right, said 2017, we're like high election irregularities, but nothing happened. And it's just business as usual, American military bases all over the country. And that, to me, Honduras is just a perfect example of the hypocrisy and just the utter bankruptcy of like even like the Jacobin left type people in Brooklyn that want to constantly be critical of Venezuela, point out just like all these nuanced academic stuff about, calling people tankies and whatnot, labeling the gray zone part of some red-brown alliance. It's just that. What do they say to that? It's so explicit. It's so unconscionable. And then the contradictions within it, they have like what's even, if you really want to have your mind blown, that a lot of the landowners and the business class there are actually Palestinians that were dispossessed by Zionists that now have gone to Honduras, I guess. And Max, you know more about this than me, and then own land. And then Honduran workers have this resentment towards these like Palestinian oppressors that are now, I guess they're like Zionists too. Now, I mean, what? It's just, it's so mind blowing. It's hard to even make sense of. But
it's funny, the Jewish and Palestinian business class in Honduras gets along really well.
Yeah, a lot of shared interests.
Everybody else kind of dislikes them, at least the majority of the country. But yeah, I mean, it's another example of going along with the Washington consensus and the price you pay for it. Whereas, and right now, I mean, this is completely off topic, but you mentioned COVID, like all the Central American countries, Guatemala, Honduras, they're under a harsh lockdown that we couldn't even imagine in the U.S. People are are technically forbidden from leaving their homes, and you're living like hand to mouth, day to day there in a country where there really is no economy. You're going to die at home. And at the same time, the IMF is just pumping in aid money, which makes their countries more strapped to or connected to the United States. And so it's like, we'll do whatever you want to get the aid money, and then we'll cut whatever social programs. And so it's sort of this self-reinforcing destruction of public health and public of a state structure
right.
or social programs that sets people up for another crisis if there is an epidemic or Hurricane Mitch devastated Honduras. And so, I mean, we can talk all day about that. I kind of gotta jump off here, but I think that the moment we're in right now is playing out through sports as a microcosm. And I think that's why your show is so important. And it's also important to watch out for all of the mechanisms that are going to be employed to co-opt the real organic mobilization that's going to take place within locker rooms and on the field. Absolutely.
And I know you got to go, and just like to close it out, it's just, you mentioned the NBA, right? And they're coming back, and just these, the whole patches on stuff, the NFL, my cause, my cleats. The NBA likes to portray themselves as like the owners and players are more like partners, to act as if like that's a contrast to the oppressive NFL situation. I would argue that they're both, it's not really that big of a distinction. But nonetheless, just like Max said, it's like that. It's a critical battleground. This COVID context now has changed the game. We're seeing college football may be completely off the table. Ivy League's already canceled. Big Ten is like conference only, and we're only where we are now here in July. But the world's different, and like sports are a microcosm. And they're, especially with their absence now, in a way that's never happened before across the board. We've had strikes, lockouts, but their total absence. We're starting to see, because of that, people realizing what not having that escape is like in their life. And it's causing people to kind of like have to confront reality a little bit more. And with that, the players themselves too are having to do that. And I think that despite the horrible examples of like the guys that are co-opted, and we saw during this show tonight, guys like Michael Bennett, guys like, hopefully Kaepernick still, Kenny Stills, who, it's paid a price, taking a knee, Eric Reed. There's so many others to go down the list of guys that aren't like that. Justin Jackson, Los Angeles Chargers. I mean, honestly, he's become kind of a hero of mine here in recent months, just in the sense of just seeing an athlete who took a role. I don't know if he was on the Northwestern team yet when they were developing the union, the College Athletes Players Association the first time, but a guy who, I think he's maybe able to get away with it because he's a special teams kind of guy, running back, backup. He's not like a quarterback face of a franchise, but who knows? Maybe they might try to shut him up next. But if the NFL does play, they might be unleashing their own Frankenstein monster in the form of players that are going to not have as many second thoughts in this kind of context, in the changing world we're in, about taking a knee and maybe doing even more radical forms of activism. So while there's despair and absurdity that we saw in this kind of stuff with Israel and the propaganda, there's hope too. And we just got to, keep fighting. And so I appreciate you coming on, Max, and we appreciate Mike, especially, who had to go on another, activist call, but he, providing some great context on oppressed nationality questions and so much else. So
you can follow all our work at thegrayzone.com, and I'm Max Blumenthal on Twitter. Thanks a lot for having me.
I appreciate it, Max. And same here with at Nate Wallace 9 on Twitter and at Redspin Sports. So until next time, keep fighting, and we'll see what happens. But anyways, I didn't finish it out there that good, but the point is,
do it again.
All right. So
you're Nate Wallace.
I'm Nate Wallace at Nate Wallace 9 on Twitter. You can also follow me at Redspin. Not follow me, but Mike has access to it. No. All right. Well, hold on. Fuck. Now I'm in my head now. All right. This ending. All right. Here we go. So to put a wrap on everything we've talked about tonight, there's been a lot of stuff that's, while seemingly hopeless.
You just say your fucking name and your Twitter handle, and
I was almost there, man. All right,
one more time.
So put a wrap on it tonight. You can follow me on Twitter at Nate Wallace 9 or Redspin Sports at Redspin Sports. Mike Sampson at Brother Flourish on Twitter. And Max, appreciate having you on. Appreciate having Mike on in the context he did. And any last words you could close it out for us?
Well, thanks for having me. You can follow me at thegrayzone.com and Max Blumenthal. And Also, Moderate Rebels is my podcast I co-host with Ben Norton.
All right. Appreciate it. Keep fighting. And until next time, we'll see you then. All right.
All right. I'm out.
Peace.